the government in Warsaw has been very hostile to Russia from the first moment. And they are caught up in this emotional hysteria that on the one hand, Russia is evil and any Russian has to be destroyed. And on the other hand, they see themselves as the inevitable imperial masters of much of Ukraine and Belarusia. I think that's falling apart right now. In fact, I received some information this morning from my friends in Poland telling me that 52% of Poles have now essentially said, we want nothing to do with the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
Some say, well, we'll send support and assistance. But our real interest in Poland right now is to get millions of Ukrainians out of Poland.
Okay.
So that's a big change. So I think it's going to be very hard now for the Poles to be an American stalking horse, because effectively that's what we tried to do with Ukraine. They were a stalking horse. Let's push and push and push, see how far we can go to the border with Russia. And if we can put troops and missiles and equipment out there in the east that will threaten Russia, that's a good thing. Then we can bully Russia. We forgot we weren't dealing with Iraq. We weren't dealing with any of these sort of artificial constructs as opposed to real nation states. Russia is a real place. So, now we're paying a terrible price. But I think we're learning, and I think Americans are learning, because they look and they say, we have so many people in the United States who need help and support. Why are we sending billions to Ukraine? It's a very simplistic formula, but it's working.
Yep. See your point. Um, what will Russia do? I mean, they can't. I mean, if I analyze their actions right now, they're like pushing in small ways. They're advancing their front a little bit. They dig in and they wait for the Ukrainians to come for them, and then they annihilate them. They attack with very small infantry units backed up by tanks. I think they play a very uh, thought out game. It's not so bad what they're doing. Um, what will be the decisive moment that Putin says this is it? Because I read the statements from the Felicius, what was it, the meeting, the NATO meeting we just had, and NATO is still on the same as the same point of view, like Russia's bad and we only accept a total retreat, and that will not happen. So in your opinion, where in the end will this lead? Will they march on to Poland, or I mean, do you see any perspective here?
Well, keep in mind that the last thing that Vladimir Putin wants is to govern Ukrainians. So he'd rather not cross that river and march west. That was never his plan.
No.
If you look at the areas where the Russian forces are currently sitting, those are historically Russian areas, and that's where the Russian speakers live.
Yep.
He has always said that Kharkov and Odessa would
Mm-hmm.
once again be Russian cities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will happen. There's no question about that. I think at the same time, he's watching to see what the West is going to do. He sees Scholz in Berlin in an extremely fragile position. Scholz has an approval rating of about 31%. The German electorate says it wants a new government. I think the Germans have finally discovered that they're not only headed into a deep recession, but they're being deindustrialized. Their scientific industrial power is being destroyed. And again, the Germans are saying, well, we were never really consulted, were we? No one asked us whether or not we wanted to declare war. Instead, you had all these emotional outbursts from, this woman Baerbock, who is absurd, who refused to shake the hand of Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. It was just childish nonsense. And all of this, Moscow's watching and saying, well, how long before Scholz is gone? How long before Macron is gone? If they can get rid, I'm saying the Europeans, if they can get rid of those two, then I think you may have some governments that will come forward and say that's enough.
Yep.
And then you have Washington, and Washington is stuck in a swamp of its own creation. No one wants to retreat from ridiculous statements and policy positions. No one wants to step forward and say, this is a real mistake. By the way, we lied to you, and we've been lying to you for months. Right now there are 37 Ukrainian brigades, we think roughly 37, all along the defensive line from the southeast, I would say, to the northeast. We think the Ukrainians may have 6 brigades in reserve. 6 brigades amounts to what? 24,000. A little over 100,000 Ukrainians sitting in these defensive positions where obviously they are being hammered on a routine basis and dying every day. At the same time, the Russians have 300,000 troops in reserve. And Putin has always been reluctant to commit that reserve and bring this to a rapid close because he's afraid that we will then suddenly convince everyone in NATO to go into Western Ukraine. And if that happens, then he's got a war in his hands that he really never wanted, but he is then compelled to win it.
Yep.
He can't back away. He can't allow this rump state that may emerge from this experience to be part of NATO. You know, from the very beginning, Ukraine should have been neutral, had no business being part of NATO. He knows that. So I think it's really a matter for decision by Vladimir Putin. And I think he's watching all of these things before he commits forces. And lastly, and I know a lot of people don't believe this, but this is true, he doesn't want to kill any more Ukrainians. They are Slavs and Orthodox Christian Slavs. He's not interested in killing them.
I agree. I predicted a long time ago that more or less what you're saying right now, he would consent to the eastern part of Ukraine, but then what with the western part of Ukraine? I mean, he would still demand neutrality of that part of Ukraine. And
Absolutely.
as I read the last statement of NATO, they're clearly not willing to give him that. So that puts us in a very difficult position. Then I'm with you. Putin doesn't want this war. He doesn't want to kill Ukrainians. He wants to end this yesterday, but obviously he can't. Just to jump to another topic, I mean, the Netherlands were running front to now deliver F-16s to Ukraine. They have not yet been delivered. They have been promised. Denmark did the same. Will that impress Putin in any way?
No. He knows that those F-16s, without airborne warning and control systems, these are the aircraft with extraordinary communications capability and radars. They're the ones that target for all of the aircraft. You're talking about a very complex operation. So this is not going to arrive before this comes to an end, in my judgment. It's not going to change anything. I think it's very foolish.
So do I. First of all, they have to train the pilots, of course, which they will do after they have had a course of 1 month to learn to speak English, which I think is ridiculous. It's true. I'm not joking here. But then we need all the support for those F-16s, and they don't even have a runway long enough to facilitate those aircraft. So these are as well completely ridiculous decisions. I think you said it somewhere that the military genius have been put out of this operation. It's now politicians that decide